Should we be concerned about the fact that China is so powerful and threatens to dominate Asia? And I believe you do not have a good explanation. In fact, you don't have really an explanation for why we should try to contain Chinese power.
Right.
And
I don't want to launch a big containment crusade.
yes, but I would just say to you, I understand the logic behind your position. And I want to be clear, I think it is a powerful logic, but it is the isolationist logic that has a rich history in the United States. See, isolationism has been tarred and feathered as a legitimate grand strategy. The reason Roosevelt had so much difficulty defeating isolationism in the 30s and early 40s is because the argument for isolationism is so powerful. And it's even more powerful today because we have nuclear weapons. Again, I'm not an isolationist. I'm in favor of containing China. But the point is, you and many of my realist friends, by the way, do not really believe that we should be containing China. Well, if we shouldn't be containing China, what countries should we be containing?
Well,
why are we worried about Russian domination of Eastern Europe if we're not going to worry about Chinese domination of Asia?
John, it's possible we shouldn't worry about containing any countries. Consider that possibility. So I don't consider, like, if not China, who will we contain, a killer argument. But let me first of all,
I fully understand what you're saying.
First of all,
that's the isolationist argument. And it's a very powerful argument.
Well, first of all, isolationist is almost never a strictly accurate term. Isolationist often want economic engagement. As a historical matter, what's that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can have economic and diplomatic engagement. The question is, where are you willing to fight and die? And the isolationist argument is you're not willing to fight and die outside of the Western Hemisphere.
I wouldn't put it that way. I said we defend Japan and South Korea, but I would also say, first of all, as an historical matter, turns out some of the so-called isolationists were actually China hawks, right? Senator Taft, I think, was something of a China hawk or something. But anyway, that aside, the other sense in which I'm not an isolationist is I'm a global governance like fanatic. And in fact, the reason I think we cannot afford a deep Cold War, let alone true open hostilities with China, is that there are a growing number of problems that demand international cooperation if they are to be solved in ways America should want them to be solved. You know, famous one is climate change. Another one is AI. An AI arms race could lead to horrible destabilization, both, I think, internally in the U.S. and globally. I just think, that's my view. We don't have to argue that, but it's. I think I have even more grounds than the average so-called isolationist to say that I resist that label.
Okay, but not to beat a dead horse here. To be an isolationist does not mean that you are opposed to global governance of the sort you were describing, that you're not interested in being deeply involved in the world economically and diplomatically. Isolationism, as I define it, and I think you were defining it before, is all about the question of whether you're willing to fight and die outside of the Western Hemisphere. And the question is, are there good strategic reasons for doing that? And I think, again, to beat a dead horse, that there is a powerful case to be made for isolationism. And I'm not an isolationist, but when I was arguing against isolationism, when you asked me why we should be concerned about China dominating Asia, my response did not satisfy you. When I said that China had the ability to roam, it could roam into the Western Hemisphere, might form a military alliance with Mexico, you poo-pooed that argument. You didn't have much use for it.
I think we can avoid that, which, by the way, itself would not be a truly existential threat, but even if they did, but I think we could absolutely avoid that eventuality with even modestly competent diplomacy.
That may be asking too much.
Well, that's a separate problem that frustrates both of us. Let me just make sure I understand, though, within the Pacific. Okay, so your main concern about China exercising power within the Pacific, controlling, in other words, them not feeling defensively threatened in the Pacific, is that then they don't need to focus so many military. Well, I guess this is your argument. You tell me. Then they don't need to focus so many military resources there and are free to roam and do these horrible things you think they'll do closer to America's shores. So, but is that, I mean, first of all, do I have that right? Secondly, is that the extent of your concern? In other words, there's nothing bad in and of itself about the way they would exercise dominance in Asia?
Correct. That's correct.
There's nothing bad about that in and of itself.
Well, there may be certain aspects of Chinese domination of Asia that I don't like, but I'm not willing to fight and die, spill American blood and iron for that purpose, preventing that from happening. I am willing to fight and die to prevent China from dominating Asia, because it would then be a security threat to the United States. I want the United States to remain the only regional hegemon on the planet.
That's a real kind of minority argument, right? I mean,
no,
there aren't that many China hawks who are China hawks for the reasons you're a China hawk, right?
I don't know what they think in private. I think that in public, you have to use liberal rhetoric to describe American behavior, because that's how you justify it to the American public. You can't get the American public to fight and die for the balance of power. It's much easier to get the American public to fight and die for liberal democracy and to oppose dictatorship and autocracy. This, of course, is why every one of our adversaries since 1945 becomes Adolf Hitler, right? Because if we're fighting against Adolf Hitler, you can get the American public ginnied up to support the war. But I actually believe that there are these structural considerations that sit at the heart of the decision-making process.
Thanks for watching Nonzero Clips. The clip you just watched is from the overtime segment of a Nonzero podcast episode. To hear the public portion of that episode, and others like it, subscribe to the Nonzero YouTube channel or Nonzero podcast feed. And to gain access to overtime segments and other exclusive content, subscribe to Robert Wright's Nonzero newsletter on Substack.